Okay, thank you. So I'm a historian of the media, mainly film, but today I'm going to talk about the internet. And in some ways it's difficult for a historian to talk about something which is so new, which is something which is happening right now. But my argument is that the best perspective that we can get on the internet comes from looking at the history of other media. So I'm going to suggest 12 ways in which the past can shed light on the present and maybe the future. Why 12? Well, it was going to be 13, but one of them wasn't very good, so I changed it to 12. Okay, so number one. Nobody really knows anything. So we're in the middle of a huge social change. The worlds of leisure, employment, communication are being reshaped before us. And people have no idea how it's going to end up. The people who invented the internet weren't trying to change the world. For them, it was a solution to an engineering problem. In 1943, the chairman of IBM reportedly said, "I think there's a world market for maybe 5 computers." And I think there are more than 5 computers in the present today, but this was the state of knowledge at the time that he was speaking. Thomas Edison, who invented the phonograph, the first device for recording sound, thought that people would use it for dictating letters to their secretaries. Alexander Graham Bell, who invented the telephone, thought that people would use it for sending messages to their butlers. They weren't stupid. They just weren't psychic. They didn't know what they had invented. And we're not psychic either, so we don't know how things are going to end up. Okay, number 2. Communication systems start off open and end up closed. So Tim Wu has suggested that there's a cycle that information technologies go through. They travel from open systems, where many contributors work on them, to a closed channel, which is dominated by a single company or a cartel of companies. In America, this has been the case with radio, newspapers, cinema, even television. And it's the case with the internet as well. Until the late 1990s, the internet was an open and free place where little money changed hands. Today, the internet has been colonized by a small number of private corporations, all based in the same part of California, and their influence over the public is absolutely enormous. So can the internet be a free and open place again? This takes me to my third point, which is that media ownership is important. People used to be concerned about the power of people like Rupert Murdoch, who owned various newspapers and television stations. But today, that kind of monopoly power pales into insignificance. Today, Google controls about 88% of online search. Facebook controls about 77% of social media traffic. These are monopolies by any standards. And it means that 2 companies control or dominate public access to almost all media online. So what can we do? Jonathan Taplin has made the case for breaking up companies like Google, forcing them to sell parts of themselves off so they break up into smaller, less powerful organizations. And this sounds crazy. Why would you ask a successful company to diminish themselves? But it has happened before. In the early 1980s, the American telephone system was dominated by one company, the Bell telephone system. But the government required them to break up this monopoly, so the Bell system was split up into several smaller, more local companies. And as a result, telecommunication in America became more competitive, and therefore innovation increased. Okay, my fourth point. Our attention has a price and a cost. So our attention online is a commodity. And companies like Facebook have a business in mining this attention, in extracting this attention. and then selling it on to advertisers for the highest price. Older media companies worked like this as well. So television stations and newspapers created audiences and then sold advertising around their content to advertisers who wanted to reach these audiences. But Facebook are better at it. They're better at mining our attention, and they're better at selling our personal data to organizations. And I think the cost is to us, because companies like Facebook are so expert at extracting our attention. It becomes very hard to focus on other things. It makes it hard for us to avoid being distracted. The internet is designed to distract us so that our attention can be sold to advertisers. Number 5, technology is disruptive. And by this I mean economically disruptive. The number of jobs that will soon become performed by software is growing. The rise of driverless cars is very exciting, unless you're one of the millions of people whose job involves driving in some fashion. There are precedents to this. A few hundred years ago, most people around the world worked in agriculture. Industrialization took these jobs away. Machinery meant that fewer people needed to be employed in agriculture. But new jobs were created in factories to replace these jobs. But what if this new industrial revolution is something else? Where will the new jobs come from in the age of artificial intelligence? And I think the point is that capital wins over labour, which is to say that the people who own the robots and own the software are in a much better position than the people who they would previously have employed. Okay, number 6, people stop valuing things when they are free. So one obvious effect of the internet has been to reduce the value that people place on things like films and television, music and journalism. We're used to getting these things for free now, and as a result, they seem to be worth less to people. Good quality news, good quality music is expensive to produce, but the audience for these things is less willing to pay money for them. But I think what's interesting is that we expect internet services to be free as well. How much would we pay to use Facebook? Does Facebook cost €5 a month? If Google cost €10 a month, who would actually pay that money? I think that suggests that the hold that these companies have over us is actually quite weak. If people are completely unwilling to pay to use these services, it suggests that they're not really valuable to people. Okay, number 7. We live in information ghettos. So hundreds of years ago, information was incredibly scarce, and therefore the people who had access to this information became very powerful. Today, information is not scarce, but the information we receive is increasingly tailored towards our personal interests. The writer Eli Pariser has called this the filter bubble, and it's the idea that social media and search engines create unique universes of information for each of their users. In some ways this is good. More specific, more targeted information is good. But if we live in our own information bubbles, it becomes hard to see things from the point of view of other people. There's an interesting quote from Mark Zuckerberg, and I'm sure he regrets saying this, but he said, "A squirrel dying in front of your house may be more relevant to your interest right now than people dying in Africa." Which seems shocking, but the sad thing is I think he's probably right. For most people, something happening which is specific to their location is more interesting than famine or civil war. I think most people would prefer to read gossip online than they would to read about the possibility of nuclear war in North Korea. The question is that right? Should they be more interested in squirrels than war? Okay, number 8. Our sense of privacy is flexible. I think we're getting used to the idea of being surveilled by our own technology, of living under surveillance through the mobile phones that we carry in our pockets, through our activities online. And people have really bought into the idea of sharing, the idea that sharing information online is a social good. But I think what that sharing really means is allowing companies like Facebook to sell our personal data to advertisers. People often say that if you've got nothing to hide, if you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to hide. But I think that's a fallacy. I mean, we all have things to hide. There are things that we would like to tell our husbands or wives or our doctors that we wouldn't like anybody else to know. That doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means we would like to control who has access to private information about us. On the other hand, privacy may be a relatively recent concept. Before industrialization, it was common for humans to live much closer together, and it was impossible to keep secrets from your neighbours. It was only in the 19th century that people could afford to live in private rooms, and so the modern sense of privacy developed. So people have tolerated less privacy in the past, and it's likely that they will do so in the future as well. Okay, number 9, digital information is not permanent. So when I started writing my PhD thesis way back in 2003, I kept it on a disk like this. If I still had that disk today, what could I do with it? Would I be able to find a computer that could read this disk? The way that we store information and the formats we use to store it become obsolete very quickly. The number of computers that have optical CD or DVD drives is reducing. The number of computers that have USB ports is reducing as they're replaced by different types of ports. So information that's stored digitally is vulnerable to becoming obsolete. On the other hand, books still work. You can have a book from a few hundred years ago and it still works. This technology has not become obsolete. And I think this poses problems for future historians. If you want to learn about the past, you read documents from the archive, you read letters that people have written. If all of this information exists digitally, there are huge questions about how people are going to be able to access it. Okay, number 10. But the internet makes it hard for us to escape the past. In a sense, we are tied to the mistakes we have made, the things we have said, through the online presence that we've created. It's harder for people to reinvent themselves if a search of their name brings up a photo or a comment that they might have made years ago. And I think that the next generation of political leaders will have to be very boring if they've never made any mistakes that could embarrass them in the future. Number 11, technologies mainly empower the powerful. So the benefits of the internet have not been spread equally around the world. The main benefactors are those who are already privileged in wealth and status. This graph shows us how many internet users there are per 100 inhabitants in the developed world and the developing world. So the upper line is the developed world, and the lower line is the developing world. We can debate what those terms really mean, but I think what's interesting is the gap between the developed world and the developing world is increasing. More people in the developed world are getting online than people in developing countries. So the gap between the haves and the have-nots is widening. If you look at the most popular people on Twitter and on Instagram, it's people who are already famous. It's people who have profile in other forms of media. So the loudest voices on social media are people who already have fame and power and influence through other means. Recently, Facebook released some data about where their money comes from, and they revealed that they receive about $20 per user in the US and Canada, about $6 per user in Europe, about $2 per user in the Asia-Pacific region, and about $1.40 per user in the rest of the world, which I think means South America South Asia and Africa. So clearly they're much more interested in the market which brings them money. They get 10 times as much money from the US and Canada as from the rest of the world. This is the market that is valuable to them. And finally, number 12. The internet is just a tool. It's not ideological in itself. It's an expression of power, but it doesn't represent any specific opinions. It does not cause revolutions. The Arab Spring was not the result of Twitter or Facebook. The printing press did not create the Reformation or lead to the scientific revolution. It facilitated these things, but they did not emerge from that technology. So I think what matters, given that the internet is a tool, is how we use it, and also who uses it, and also who benefits from it. And I think it should be us who benefits, rather than corporations. Okay, thank you. The end.